Welcome to the Telehealth Heroes Podcast, a show about healthcare providers doing amazing things with telemedicine. I'm your host, Brandon Welch. On today's episode, we'll hear from Dr. Joe Krainin, a neurologist and sleep medicine specialist who overcame the challenges of the medical system to create his own online practice, Singular Sleep. Let's get started. Dr. Krainin, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Brandon, it's my pleasure.
Great. So tell us, why did you get into medicine?
Well, I think everyone has the answer they give during their interviews for medical school, and then there's like the real reason. But I think mine's probably not too different than what I said. Science was always going to be where I went. I just had that sort of brain. I want to find the truth. That's what I'm interested in. As David Foster Wallace would say, the capital T truth, the unadulterated truth. And I'm not afraid to go there. And so I knew it was going to be science. In college, I tried a couple different things. I did an internship in Woods Hole at the at NOAA, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Association. I ended up counting these minuscule cod larvae or eggs. I forget what it was exactly, but it was very tedious. And I'm like, I can't do this the rest of something like this. If I'm going to do it was then I was like, I got to do something with people. I mean, that's just going to be way more interesting than some like tiny little animal or some animal that you have to make a lot of inferences about by observing it. Like, people are the most interesting animals, right? So let's cut right to the chase. So then the natural thing was medicine. You're putting the science and people together. So that's where you go. So for me, that was back. And there's also an overriding respect for medicine in my family, particularly the paternal side of my family, because my dad's father was a physician. He was a general practitioner in New York. And he was like one of two doctors in the whole area. And I mean, he was just like integral to the community. He would just, give the kids the school physicals on up to taking care of, the elderly people in the town. And there was just a lot of respect for that, that field, growing up, passed down from that whole side of the family. So I think that, and he was also Joseph Krainin too. So I was named after. He died about a month before I was born. So I never met him, but he was sort of like a mythical figure in the family. He also played semi-professional. Well, he played professional baseball for the New York Giants, but he never made it to the big leagues. He was like, I don't know, maybe Double-A or something like that. But this rumor was he put himself through medical school by the money he earned playing baseball. So pretty cool guy. I wish I had a chance to meet him, but that was definitely an influence too.
Yeah, great. So you got into sleep medicine and neurology. Tell us a little bit about that path and where that got you to essentially your passion in medicine today.
My intention in medical school was to go into psychiatry because I really liked the idea of the intellectual component of psychiatry. It wasn't so cut and dry. Contrast that to orthopedic surgery, where you're basically a tradesman. You're an extremely well-trained, highly paid carpenter, basically. And you end up doing the same stuff over and over again, probably like 3 or 4 things is going to, as a surgeon or most doctors that do procedures, do a couple things over and over again. I like the idea of using my brain, but when I got into it, I found that psychiatry really wasn't for me. It was like, number one, just too depressing. So I kind of had a falling out with psychiatry and then a falling in with neurology, which was kind of the flip side of that. So the mind-brain duality, right? So psychiatry is the mind, neurology is the brain. Doesn't get cooler than that, right? And it's a little bit more dry. Like it was easier for me to kind of hang it up and call it a day. And it was by far the most interesting thing to study for me. I mean, the brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, probably, right? And like, maybe we'll never be able to understand it because of just the limitations of our brain trying to understand the brain. But once I mastered neurology, I just devoted myself like a slave to study neurology during residency. So it's 4 years, and just engrossed with it, just obsessed with it. But once I felt like I figured it out, it's like, what can you do with neurology? I felt like you can't help that many people. At least I felt that way. There's a lot of chronic disorders that you're dealing with that you can maybe kind of slow down or slow down the rate of decay of the individual's abilities, but there's not a lot of big W's with neurology. So there was sleep. And there was also a very colorful mentor that pushed me there, Dr. David Rosenfeld, who is the first guy to characterize a subset of parasomnias, which is like sleepwalking sort of behaviors, where people act out sexual impulses in their sleep. And he coined the term sleep sex, and it later someone else discovered it and named it sexsomnia. So he did the first case series of this. He's just like really fascinating guy, and really was in the right place at the right time for me, and sort of like, oh, you got to go into this field. It's so cool. And you can really help people. So that's the great thing. Like, coming from a neurology background, there's a treatment for every sleep disorder, and they work. And people, although on some level, I don't know, if you compare to, say, a hematologist, oncologist, they're curing or treating cancer and like saving lives. What am I doing on a day-to-day basis? I'm helping people sleep better. That may not seem as important, but really you can meaningfully improve the quality of people's lives very quickly, which is, as a physician, quite satisfying, because what they don't tell you before you go to med school is a lot of times you just keep seeing the same people circling around it. Sometimes you feel like you're rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? And it's like, even that orthopedic surgeon, there's a problem, he fixed it, and then a couple months later, a person comes back and they're in pain again. Okay, well, oh shoot, well, what do we do now? So this, it's very satisfying for me because people like love you. When you get them to sleep well and they're feeling good and much more productive during the day, they're happier, and long term, we can really affect some good health benefits. If these disorders are not corrected, like, say, sleep apnea, it can lead to a lot of badness down the line.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you are attracted to making an impact on patients' lives. And in neurology, there's a lot of diseases that you can help, but it's not really making a huge impact. Whereas you see that sleep is something that you can really make that impact that you're looking for.
For me, yes, I'm sure, neurologists love to argue. That's kind of our thing. We want to be right. I think it's because there's so little we can do for people that we get our satisfaction from being right, being correct. So it's like, the classic thing was someone comes in with this, very complicated problem, and the neurologist, is teaching the med students and uses some German eponym to describe this rare phenomenon. And it's sort of like, okay, cool. Now what do we do? It's like, well, there's nothing to do, next patient. Yeah, for me, it is one of the areas that is, under neurology, in some ways that is a very effective field where you can really help people. The other thing is it's quite new. It's basically a baby. I mean, CPAP was only invented in the 1980s. And so that's the mainstay treatment for sleep apnea, right? And, all the innovation in sleep medicine is relatively recent. So because it's young, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, and it's fun to be a part of that and help try to figure it out, as opposed to, Parkinson's disease. That's pretty, a lot of that stuff has been worked out pretty well. Whereas is sleep, it's kind of in some ways the Wild West. I mean, we still don't really know why we sleep. I mean, anyone who tells you otherwise is lying, which is, I mean, the fundamental question of the field has not been answered yet.
Yeah. So did you start right from your residency going into sleep full time, or what was that transition that ultimately got you to doing sleep full time and your own practice?
Yeah. So just like in pretty much, it seems every field of medicine is tending away from generalists and more to subspecialists. And so it's very common in neurology, after you finish this grueling 4 years, that you then sign up for more pain and do extra training in some particular subspecialty. So there's a lot of different fields you can go into.
Gotcha. So tell me how you run your own practice now. Is that something you set out to always do, to own your own practice, or how did you really get into that?
No, it was, I think I was pretty much put through the sausage making factory by the system, is what I like to say. And it didn't even occur to me that I could do that, because, the days of my grandfather, he did 1 year of training, internship. And then he was drafted to World War II, and he ended up doing a lot of plastic surgery on returning vets. And his commanding officer, also a physician, said, I think you should go to the Mayo Clinic and do some extra training in this. And by that time, he had two kids, and he said no. So he just hung his shingle and started his practice, just him by himself. And it was a business, and people paid cash, if you can believe it. They didn't have insurance. Can you imagine a time where there's no health care insurance? Like, how did life work? Well, it apparently worked pretty well. He had a nice life, and he was working a lot, but I think he was happy and satisfied, and he was, like I said, a very important part of the community. But the system now basically tells you need to get a job. Someone needs to write you a paycheck. That's kind of the way the mindset is shaped right now. And even more so, increasingly now, it's you need to either work for a big multi-specialty group or an academic type setting. There's just not really the push towards private practice. Private practice has been basically like cut off at the knees, and it really was, I think, heading in the wrong direction. I think private practice is, especially solo private practice or small group, is really, really important for competition. But it was going in a bad direction. But then with Obama's administration, basically there were some changes where, to give you an example, changes were made in Medicare where they said, okay, take the example of cardiologists. We're going to, if you do the echocardiogram in the hospital, we're going to pay $200. If you do it in your private office, we're only going to pay you $50. So of course, what are they trying to incentivize here? And what happened was, what they wanted was killing private practice, and these groups got bought by these ACAs. That was a big thing then. Remember that? And I don't know really what's happened with all that, but the government wanted this consolidation of hospitals with big big primary care groups, and then specialists in this ecosystem where everyone's data could be tracked through online medical records and whatnot. So that really was sort of like the death knell, as I see it, for traditional private practice. It's really hard now to just go out and hang your shingle and start a business. But there are some of us who just said, we're going to try it, the crazy ones. And, and to do that, you have to, as Steve Jobs would say, think different. I think the reason that I've had, I'm still here with you. I started Singular Sleep. We launched 6 years ago. And I think that the reason we're still here and we're doing well is that I wasn't trying to replicate the traditional private practice of old, but something totally different, and found space for that. And I think the physicians who want to do something different outside of the system now also have to find that niche and elbow their way in, which is, I think, an uncomfortable feeling for a lot of doctors who don't think of themselves as business people because they don't think of medicine as a business. Well, I'm here to tell you it absolutely is. Just because you don't see the sausage being made, money is moving all around, and that is a business. And so I would love doctors to think more like that. Doesn't mean get an MBA, but think more about markets and think about things in terms of business. And I think that it could only help our healthcare system. Competition, innovation, trying new things. Not everything's going to work out. That's part of growth and moving in the right direction. It's all evolution, right? And that's what business is. You got to try. You got to have a mutation and have a different phenotype, and then maybe it wins out, maybe it doesn't. If it wins out, it gets more resources, and that spreads, and that's how things get better, right? What we have here is kind of like some reverse evolution in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Devolving in a way. So how did you were trained as a traditional doctor and going through the ranks. What caused you to break out of that mentality and to really, as you say, think different? What was that point that made you think different? And then what was that? How did that make you feel? And then what did you do to do that or to make that change?
Well, I think if I was going to characterize my story, I would say I followed the pathway that the system wanted me to follow, which was finished fellowship. I joined a hospital-based physician group, and I did well. I quickly became, in like a year, the medical director of this big sleep center. I think in the end we had like 18 beds or something like that, which is really big. And after a few years, I was, number one, really bored. And that's something, if physicians are honest, they're going to tell you. The practice of medicine, if you don't know what's going on in the first couple minutes with a patient, then there's something wrong with you. Because if you do this long enough, you should know pretty quickly. That shouldn't be, your brain shouldn't be straining to figure out what the diagnosis is. If you do this for a few years, you tend to see the same stuff over and over. It's like Occam's razor, right? With your approach to this. So in especially sleep medicine, I'm not going to lie. The diagnostics of sleep medicine are nowhere like neurology. I mean, vast majority of people who come in are coming in and they're going to have sleep apnea. That's just sort of like our cross to bear. So you got, it wasn't feeling challenged, and I feel like I hit like a plateau in terms of my growth and development, but also wasn't really a decision maker. Although I was nominally the medical director of the sleep center, all the real decisions were being made by a nurse who was, even though like not officially, but she was really running the whole neuroscience department, and she was my boss. And I'm like, why did I go to medical school and do all this training to end up working for someone who doesn't have that training, and she's making all these decisions? And like, you know, it would come down to hiring people, and I think this person's great, and she would ultimately, you know, even though it would be all these committees and meetings, and nothing would, you know how it is in academia, all these different meetings, and you have to have everyone on board, but then there's like someone really who's the puppet master in the back and like can kind of make the call. So, and that wasn't me. And I was like, this is really frustrating. So about that time, I was getting a little bit bored with the clinical practice of sleep medicine. I got the idea of branching out to become like a performance sleep specialist and help like elite athletes better manage their sleep to get more out of their bodies. And that led to a bizarre series of events where I ended up becoming the medical director of the Orlando Magic NBA basketball team, right? So most people just heard that and they're like, wow, that must have been so cool. And that's what I was thinking too. Like I thought this is it. This is my ticket out of the system. This is going to lead me to get specific expertise and credentials in this area. And then, you know, hopefully I'll be with Magic for a long time or whatever, or another team. But then I can be like the guy for athletes and have my own consulting business or whatever. But it quickly turned into a nightmare. So as a physician, you're used to working with people, generally speaking, who have a problem and want to get better. In this situation, the players generally did not want to acknowledge that they had any problems, and certainly didn't want to do anything about them. So, I mean, we can go, that would be a whole nother podcast, but there's a certain sort of psychology that's going to get you to this elite level. And part of that psychology is just like this extreme, you could say confidence, or you could say narcissism, that there's no like recognition of any sort of weaknesses in them. And when you're trying to help someone get better, it was just like a big wall was up. Like, you can imagine, you or me, Brandon, we're sitting in an arena. There's 20,000 people cheering. We've got to make this free throw to win the game. Like, I don't even know if I could get the ball to even touch the net. Like, I'd be so nervous, right? But these guys, their psychology is such, they don't think about that at all. It's like nothing. They're like, they think they have to be invulnerable. But so it was very difficult to deal with that. And then I was traveling with a team, and you don't go into sleep medicine unless you're like really into your own sleep. And I love sleep, and I love getting good sleep. And the schedule for the NBA is terrible. So we'd finish a game at 9, we get on the plane at 11, we'd fly across the country, we'd get in at, 3 o'clock in the morning, local time, and then have to get up for shoot around at 9. It was just terrible. It was like really a bad lifestyle. This dream I had turned into a nightmare. And then so it all kind of, basically it was one of those situations where an organization says that they want change, radical change, and then realizes that they don't want any change at all, which is extremely common. Like, to give sort of like lip service, and like you get going down this groupthink thing, and then like when something changes, they're like, oh no, we didn't want that at all. So like it ended up culminating in me at that year. Derrick Rose had this terrible ACL injury, and which kind of just like torpedoed his career. So I'm like, oh gosh, what can we do to prevent these injuries? And actually, I found a pretty good protocol used in Europe in the pro soccer leagues over there. It's a series of like plyometric exercises that they'd found had really reduced the risk of a major ACL injury, which is a bad injury. Not the most common injury in basketball, but could be devastating, as we saw. So I basically was like, I said to the orthopedic surgeon for the team, hey, I want you to put this like program together for athletes and come up with a protocol. And it was going to be like, I don't know, something like 10 minutes every other day as part of the practice, not a big commitment on their time. And we ended up, he was adamantly opposed to it. And we ended up getting in a huge fight. And basically he pulled rank. And next thing I know, I'm gone. I'm fired. So here I go. I've like gone in a situation. I thought it was going to be this dream job, and it's turned into a nightmare. And I think for me, that was sort of like you hear with like alcoholics, finding rock bottom. In a way, that was sort of career rock bottom for me. And I've never talked about this publicly, actually. You're your first person that gets this. So what happened was, when you're at rock bottom, it makes you think, how did I get here? And so that was the question. I'm like, I don't really even like basketball. Why did I take this job? It was sort of like I thought that if I did this, this would be good and this would be beneficial. But I wasn't thinking about what was right for me, Joe Krainin, what was like the best fit. I didn't know myself. And this was a huge wake-up call. And it made me confront a lot of things, including a bunch of, I think, underlying fears and anxieties. And one of those fears, and we've talked about this, one of those big fears for me was learning how to ride a motorcycle. And after this didn't work out anywhere near as I thought it would, it made me reevaluate everything. And I was much more open to stuff. I just felt more open. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to learn how to do this. And I was so scared. I remember getting on the motorcycle at the Harley Davidson store and turning it on. I thought I was going to immediately ride through the fence onto the highway and kill myself. And and then it was other fears of like, commitment and getting married and having kids. And then the deepest fear, if I'm going to be honest with you, Brandon, was starting my own business, because you're really putting yourself out there, totally exposed to the world, and it's all you. You can't blame anyone else. It's like, here I am. I'm going to go for it. If I fail, it's all me. There's no one else to blame. And so I got the guts to do it. And I knew, so in thinking about and learning about myself, and which I don't think a lot of us are very much in touch. We just kind of do things. Even a lot of people go into medicine because their parents wanted them to, or their brother, their dad, whatever. And they don't, and then they're like 20 years later, they have like a major midlife crisis and they're like burnt out. They don't want to go to work. They're hating life. They're depressed. There's very high rates of depression and job dissatisfaction. I think pretty high rates of suicide in physicians too. And I think a lot of it is that people just don't know why they're doing the things that they're doing. But for me, I knew that for my personality type, that I needed to be on my own and start a business. And so that's what I did. And I looked around at a couple different ideas. One was a performance institute. I learned a lot about high performance stuff, and for focusing on like high school athletes and working with them with some of the techniques I learned to give them an edge. Another idea was a brain health clinic to help people keep their brain as healthy as possible, prevent dementia, and be like as sharp mentally as possible. Also kind of performance-based thing. And then the other idea was this online sleep center, because what happened was after the crash with Magic, I just kind of like, while I was gathering myself together, all my family had moved to Charleston, South Carolina. So I thought, okay, let me get set up there get a little money to pay the rent, and then make my move. So I took a job at MUSC, which is where we met, and I was doing a lot of teleneurology. And it was okay, but there are limitations. Like, there's only so much that can be done remotely. Like, it's hard to tell a nurse who doesn't know how to do a neurological exam a very complicated eye pupil test. But it occurred to me, this would be an ideal format for sleep medicine because there's no physical exam really that I need to do. It's all in the history in conjunction with the sleep study. So it was like the aha moment. And then after thinking about it, I'm like, I really think because I have the most specific expertise here in sleep medicine, that this is probably my best bet. So the idea was to radically disrupt the way sleep medicine is done. The traditional method, in my mind, was ripe for it. It was just stagnant. The typical model was you have some symptoms, like you snore a lot, you feel tired, you don't sleep well. You go to your doctor, typically primary care, is to tell them about it. They order a sleep study. You wait a few weeks to longer, go into an in-lab sleep study. All the stuff, myriad sensors all over your body. It's really hard to sleep. There's a little camera with someone watching you and someone coming in periodically and adjusting the sensors that pulled loose. It's really hard to get a good night's sleep there. And then you go home, you wait a week or two, you get the results. Your doctor says, oh, yeah, you have sleep apnea. I'm going to send you into a sleep doctor. You go see the sleep doctor. That takes another month to get in, if you're lucky. The sleep doctor then orders a second in-lab study where they find the right CPAP pressure. It takes a few weeks to get into that. And then you have to wait a couple weeks to get your machine from the durable medical equipment company that your insurance company's contract with. It can take like 3 months, no problem, to get this issue start to be treated.
Right.
So
you saw this huge pain point for patients, and we're like, this is not working. There's an opportunity here to disrupt how the sleep medicine practice is done.
Huge. And no one thought of it. Everyone just said, okay, yeah, this is the way it is. That's the way it's always been.
What like when you said, hey, this is ripe for disruption, how did you go about figuring out how to disrupt it? And were there books that inspired you? Or were there other examples that inspired you? What got you thinking on this path of, okay, this needs to be disrupted, but this is how to do it, and this is where I'm going to go?
Well, there was the telemedicine concept of doing that, like interacting with patients remotely. And then the connecting the dots with, actually, this is working just okay for neurology, but it worked really well for sleep medicine, coupled with home sleep testing was on the rise. The technology gotten better to the point where we could confidently send people these kits and have them do the testing and send it back to us. And then were there other sources? I think the big connection was with, okay, the telemedicine, this would be appealing. People don't want to go in and we could do the whole thing at home. We can do this whole process at home very quickly.
Was this your first experience with telemedicine?
There was at doing neurology, telemedicine.
During neurology. Oh, yeah, that's what I mean. So at the where you were at, that was your first experience with telemedicine. So you were there. You had the background in sleep medicine, and then you were introduced to this new technology, telemedicine, and then the other new technologies coming up with at-home sleep medicine. The combination of those multiple forces are kind of converging at the same time.
There was a very influential book that I read called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. And it basically, the synopsis was like, there are two types of businesses and two types of innovation. There's one that tries to take something and make it better. And then there's that, and there's only so far you can go with that. The payoff is limited. The payoff is much bigger if you can go from, so those were the 1 to N. concepts. And then there's the 0 to 1 where there's like nothing there and you could potentially have a monopoly. And I'm like, okay, no one is doing this. I think I could actually do it. And I think I could do it myself. And the payoff could be huge. Let's go for it.
And so you went for it. And so I'm sure there were aches and pains along the way, but as you've gone for it and accomplished it, what has that done for you in terms of your career satisfaction, and are you satisfied with what you're doing today?
Well, it's the saying, there's a Zen saying, it's like something like, before I found Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. And as I was discovering Zen, mountains were no longer mountains and rivers were no longer rivers. And then I learned Zen, and mountains became mountains again and rivers became rivers again. So I think what it is, it doesn't change who you are fundamentally, but it's sort of like psychoanalysis. You have like a different understanding of yourself. For me, it's been the most important thing I've ever done in terms of my development as a human being. I liken it to, when people ask me about my experience, I think there's an underlying anxiety or angst in people of like, can I take care of myself? Can I survive in this world? And not only that, but if we have families, can I survive in this world and take care of my family? And this experience to me was akin to leaving the village where I was working as like a blacksmith and having a nice, comfortable life, going out into the woods with a knife and just like teaching myself that I could survive just with my own skills. And it really is like a self-esteem booster. It's hard, and there's like a lot of pitfalls and fails that are tough along the way. But when you get something going and it's working and you're like, I did this myself, like, well, I don't know if you didn't, who did, but yeah, I did it. That's me. And my wife was integral for sure. She was a teacher, and she helped me. She was like the practice manager, if you will. She knew nothing about medicine, nothing about sleep apnea. Very, very smart woman. I did well marrying her. And I couldn't have done it without her. She, stopped teaching and helped me do this. And I had this vision, which sometimes seemed like a delusion, but I thought it was more likely than not that it would succeed and be worth the effort. And that's the sort of decision I would say that's the decision point that people have to ask for themselves is you're not going to ever know 100% if this thing you're going to try is going to work, but do you think it's more likely than not? And if it does work, is the payoff going to be big enough to justify the risk? That's important to ask yourself. So I think it's been, for me, as a human development thing, I feel like a very evolved person because I've been able to do this. And I have a much deeper understanding of how the world works, how business works, and the inner workings of medicine. I think most doctors are just in their doctor silo, and they just do their thing and show up at work, kind of mentally punch in, mentally punch out, and they get their paycheck, and that's it. But they don't, there's so much going on behind what created that office that they go to, and all the marketing that gets the patients to show up, and all these different things were fascinating to learn about. And then actually from the science, like as I alluded to before, the clinical practice usually gets pretty mundane, if not outright boring after a while. And if you like science, it's all there because I'm doing more science, I think, than I did in clinical practice. I'm constantly looking at, okay, let's try this new thing with marketing. What if I do this with my online ads, or this affiliate marketing thing, or this, we tweak the website copy to this word instead of that word. Let's monitor and see what happens. Are people doing what we want them to do? It's very interesting. It's constant experimentation. And the benefit is more money in your pocket, if you're right. So, what's better than that, really?
So what did Singular Sleep evolve into, and what is it today?
Singular Sleep today is an online sleep center that focuses on the remote diagnosis and treatment of sleep apnea. So the typical situation is someone will order a sleep study from us online. They fill out a form and order it. We send it out to them with detailed instructions about how to do it. They do the test in their own bed, in their own home, which myself and a lot of sleep practitioners think that there's more ecological validity to doing your sleep study in your own home than the sleep lab. There are some downsides to it, but I think in general, the pros outweigh the cons in terms of getting a better picture of what's happening that night with a person. They send the sleep study back. My staff uploads it. I can read it wherever I am. And send out the report, the official report. And then they have the ability to do an online consultation with me, or they can go to their doctor and go over it and have their primary care or whoever manage it. Most folks will meet with me online. I'll explain to them in detail what the report means. And then we'll talk about treatment options. And the gold standard is still CPAP, but there are more and more innovative alternatives coming out each year, including something that came out not too long ago that's basically a tongue stimulator that teaches your tongue muscle to be stronger and it prevents it from falling back and occluding your airway. So different strokes for different folks. So depending on what the study showed, you may be a candidate for that or something else. And then we sell the equipment too that treats people. And that's really where the magic happens, because if they get the equipment from us, it allows us to remotely, now with the innovation of the equipment, we can monitor them remotely and dial the machine in for them over time to the optimal settings that best treat their sleep apnea. And then we're in it for the long term. We try to get people to, just like a typical physician's office, it's a long-term relation. This is a chronic medical problem for most people. Think of it as type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure, that there's a treatment, very good treatment. And if you don't use the treatment, a lot of bad things are going to happen to you, probably. There's really not a cure per se, other than losing a whole bunch of weight for some people, and the same sort of situation you might have with type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure. Maybe if you lose a whole bunch of weight, it could go away, but it's rare that happens. So we're managing it long term, and we want to make sure that the sleep apnea is optimally treated to help prevent the medical sequela: hypertension, type 2 diabetes, atrial fibrillation, myocardial infarctions, congestive heart failure, stroke, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a misconception out there in the medical community that so long as they're using a CPAP, you're good. That's all you need to do. It's done. Here's the problem. It would be like, the analogy I would use is, you have high blood pressure, you put someone on 20 milligrams of lisinopril, and you never check their blood pressure again. They still could be hypertensive. You might need to adjust the dose. You might need to put them on something else. Just using the CPAP is not enough. You need to make sure that the CPAP is fully treating the sleep apnea. It's really important. That's what we do, and that's what we do really well.
So at the beginning, you mentioned that you got into medicine because you wanted to find that truth, the capital T. Do you feel that you've found that with what you're doing now?
I feel like I'm on the right path. I feel like I am much more knowledgeable about the capital T truth of the universe than I was 6 years ago. I have a deeper understanding of human nature, what motivates people, what people are after, their wants and desires, how the world works. than I did when I was an employed physician. It's like going into the matrix is what it's like.
How has your perspective of healthcare in general changed through this journey that you've been on?
Well, one thing, it's been really delightful. The vast majority of my patients, since they have to open their wallets and pay money, they really want to get better, which is delightful. It's delightful to work with them. When I was in the employed model, I'd see a lot of people who are kind of being pushed through the system, like their doctor referred them, they're on Medicaid, they have no disincentive not to go to the appointment, but they're not really motivated. They don't want to they just keep getting pushed around through the system. Like some very small percentage of patients take up a disproportionate amount of healthcare resources. It's like, some of that's bad luck, but a lot of it is just not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Like put down those Twinkies and ho-hos and go walk. You know what I mean? And so the patients that I have, for the most part, are super great to work with. Now, the patients who can be a little bit challenging are people that were forced to do the sleep studies for some regulation, like a Department of Transportation thing. Like they're not motivated and they don't. That's how like a lot of my patients were before. So it's been really nice to see that. It's been nice to see like when all the incentives are aligned, how great the practice of medicine can be when people want to be there and they want to get better. Awesome. Amazing. But that's not the way we're doing it right now. So there's a classic Harvard Business School case study, which the punchline is like the problem with wanting A but rewarding B. Okay, and that's what we're doing too much of in medicine. So there's a really cool study so before Obamacare, there was Romney Care, right? And I'm from Massachusetts, so this is something that I was exposed to. And basically, very generous free healthcare for people. And the healthcare authorities weren't getting the outcomes that they were really hoping for and expecting. So they thought, okay, let's do a study. Let's charge people who have Mass Health, which is the free health plan, a token fee, a nominal fee for the services. And the theory is that they'll have some skin in the game, which will motivate them to take their health more seriously. So what we're going to do is like charge people 25 cents for a doctor's visit. And the theory is that because they pay that psychologically, they're invested in it now, and they won't, they'll want to be healthy and get healthy. So what do you think they found? Well, now it's no surprise to me as I have a deeper understanding of human nature, but they found that just that 25-cent token fee led to worse outcomes. People just stopped coming altogether. They're like, oh, I've had free healthcare. Now you're going to make me pay a quarter? Well, I'm not going. And so the diabetes got worse, the high blood pressure got worse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they did away with it. So, I mean, we've got to figure out a different way, because if you look at the budget for the U.S., it basically justifies a famous economist who said, the U.S. government is basically a healthcare company with an army. So like the majority of our expenditures are on healthcare, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, we're going to have to reconcile with the fact that resources are limited. We can't just keep printing money and spending it like drunken sailors. There's going to be a reckoning, right? And so how do we find better ways to use our resources that get the outcomes that we want? And that's a challenge. I think it's going to be to do that would be a total reevaluation and restructuring of our healthcare system. But if you asked, which you didn't, what I would say was, let's look at other insurance models. Well, first of all, we don't take insurance. So that harkens back to my grandfather. We just said, we don't want to deal with it. And it's such a hassle. it's so problematic. We said, okay, we're going to offer you care for good value, modest, reasonable cost, but we're not dealing with insurance. And that was another pain point for me in traditional practice. You end up becoming, above the nurse who is my boss was the insurance company, who is basically dictating whether they'd approve a sleep study or not, whether they'd approve this medication or not, whether they'd approve this other test or not. And I'm like, why did I go to medical school to just follow their algorithms? Like, that's not right. And that's a big source of dissatisfaction, I think, with a lot of physicians. So this way, when we're not beholden to insurance, I can just order what I think is right and prescribe what I think is right. Now, insurance may not cover it and the patient may not get it for financial reasons, but I get to do the right thing. And hopefully people will respond and do what they want. So, if they need a special high octane type CPAP machine for advanced breathing disorder, I say, here's the prescription. This is what you need. Now, their insurance may make them jump through 10 hoops to get it, but that's really a problem with the system, and I'm not playing into it, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. So as we wrap up this episode, I usually like to finish with 3 questions: the past, present, and future. So if you were to go back and do things over again, what is one thing you do different?
I would have confronted my fears earlier. I think it took me a long time, better late than never, but I think that in college, I would have started angling towards a business. Like, how can I start a business right out of college? It probably would have failed, but there's so much learning in that. If you don't try, you never. It's like the Michael Jordan quote about like taking shots. Like, I've missed I don't know what he said, what percentage, 20,000 shots, whatever it was. But we think of him as one of the greatest shooters ever, right? But it's all in the way you frame it and what you learn from it. So I would have gravitated towards business earlier and tried something earlier. That's what I would have done in the past. If the question was really, would you go into medicine? Probably not. But I think that for us physicians, look deep, look in the mirror and really look hard at yourself and ask yourself, is this where I envision myself being? Is this the life I want to lead? And if you're not there, I advocate, don't throw it all away and go into a different career or something like that, or quit, but pivot to where something that is suitable for you. So for me, I came back to medicine, but I pivoted, I tacked like you would in sailing to get to a position that works for me.
Yeah,
and medicine is so big and diverse that there is really something for everyone. I do believe that some job that is going to make you happy, or some, not necessarily job, but some job maybe you make for yourself that's going to make you happy.
So the second question is present. So what's the number one most important thing or key to being successful with telemedicine today? And your practice is a telemedicine based business.
You mean besides doxing me? Of course, doxing me is the key to our success. Doxing me. So no, we started using doxing me and we've used it the whole time. And it's been great. And, I'd love to interview you someday because you were very influential and helpful. You introduced me to some very important concepts like the diffusion of innovation theory. Like, okay, here we are, Joe, you and I are right here now. We're like maybe early adopters and but we're going to be pushing into this and then it's going to get better for us. And I think COVID really hastened that, didn't it, for us, didn't it? It really advanced that diffusion of innovation process. I think for telemedicine, I don't know if there's anything specific about telemedicine per se. It all goes back to curiosity, I think, is the key thing for being successful anything. But applying that curiosity lens to telemedicine specifically, I think the key has been online, like for us, online ads and online marketing. That is essential. So whether you're in a traditional practice or not, I think that's something that could really help your success. Knowing how to roll up your hands, be a little bit, not afraid of being a beginner again and diving into an area that you're not, you don't have a white coat for that area that makes you feel like armor, like doing something where you feel off balance a bit, like how to manage bidding on keywords and negative keyword exclusion and, looking at percentage of ranking in the top page, or all these metrics that we look at, that may not be relevant to every doctor, but knowing how to make your website look great and writing good copy that compels people to want to contact your office, and how to track that and know if you're on the right track and keep experimenting and innovating and evolving and moving in the right direction, I think is integral for success as we continue to move more to an online ecosystem for the practice of medicine.
Mm-hmm. Which leads into the next question. So future, what does the future of healthcare look like?
Well, there's the future of telemedicine, and then there's the future of healthcare in the US. I think I'm very bullish on the future of telemedicine. I think we've only just scratched the surface with this. And can you imagine a day where we have, we're not just people like me who don't really need physical exams, but maybe like an orthopedic surgeon can have, a patient go to some spoke clinic somewhere, and there's some sort of automated robot that does like an anterior drawer sign or something like that, and gives you what you need. Now, so telemedicine is not going to be appropriate for everything, but it's going to get bigger. That would be my prediction. I think it's still in its infancy with what we can do with it. And as we get more technology, the use cases are going to expand.
Well, today we've spoken with Dr. Joe Krainin from Singular Sleep. Joe, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.